Seems like we can start. So welcome again to today's webinar on levels. Get going with the e-learning calculation and assessment tool. My name is Katarina Faraj. I will be moderating today's event, and I'm going to be joined by great speakers later throughout the program. Actually, today's webinar is a repeat of what we've done in June because people really demanded a second session. And of course, we're happy to oblige to those wishes. And we're going to also see, of course, what has been happening in the meantime. But I'm happy for you to join us. We're going to be busy here in this webinar until 11:45. And we have some very interesting things that we're going to share with you in a moment. But before we do, maybe some quick rules of the game for today's session. Your cameras and microphones have been turned off by default. But of course, that doesn't mean that you cannot interact with us, because we would like you to put your comments and questions into the chat, and then we can pick them up and pose them to our speakers. Please also refrain from putting your virtual hand up, because as I said, we would like to use the chat for the communication amongst us. So please make use of that and maybe identify already the chat bubble or the chat location. This meeting will also be recorded, as you've been informed when you joined, because we will need this for the reporting, of course, as well as for other sharing. If you don't want to be visible, then please also refrain from putting elements in the chat, because that's going to be visible. Now, having said that, if there are any technical problems, please contact our colleagues via the levels events@ecorus.com email address, which is also going to be posted in the chat at this moment. Just in case you encounter any problems, please contact the colleagues there. Now, having said all of that, here is the agenda for today. We're going to look into a couple of different sessions, and we're going to start with an introduction to levels, which is, of course, especially for those of you that are not that familiar with the setup, going to be quite interesting. But also for maybe those that have already some familiarity, this can be quite helpful to get reintroduced into what levels is all about. Then we're going to go into more details and also onto the manuals and the e-learning tools. So you will get more ideas on how you could use these tools and these manuals that have been provided. What is the benefit of these? How can they be used? And of course, you can ask your questions. We have some great speakers also to give insight into these that have been part of the development. So these are the people that can really tell you more about the background and the usefulness of these specific tools. And you'll see there's plenty of time also for questions and answers, question and answer session. So please make use of those and put your questions into the chat. We will start with a very first presentation by Josephina Lindblom, the Policy Officer for Sustainable Buildings at DG Environment. And in that first part, Josephina is going to be giving us an introduction into why, how levels came about, and what we can use it for. And Josephina is the perfect candidate for that, because she has been instrumental in the last couple of years to really get levels going. So Josephina, we're very much looking forward to your introduction on levels.
Thanks a lot, Katarina, and hi to everyone who's listening. I'm indeed going to introduce levels very, can I say, give an overview, and then we will have more presentations which dig more into detail. But if I could have the next slide, please. So, levels, what is it? It is a common language. We have made it so that it would be a good, or we have developed it so that it would be a good entry-level tool for the mainstream market. So also for those stakeholders which are not necessarily used to working with life cycle assessment or performance assessments, levels is really a good start, or a good place to start, I should say. It provides the methodology on how to assess and report on sustainability of buildings. Now, having said that, it's great as a starting point for those who are not so used to it. It really provides a progressive way of working with the different indicators, so that it is also indeed very useful for those who are more or less experts in this area as well. Now, Levels has been developed to cater for both residential buildings and offices. I'm also aware of schools having used it, and that has worked very well as well. We have developed it so that it works for new buildings as well as for renovation projects. It is based to a large extent, as much as possible, on best practice industry standards. And the indicators that we will be sharing with you very soon, they have been developed together with the sector itself, and they have also been testing it before we launched Levels. Next slide, please. So I mentioned common language. What does that mean and what does it cover? We take very seriously the fact that we want to cover the full life cycle of a building project, and we look at different areas which we think are the most important ones. So there are 3 areas we call the macro objectives, the 3 top ones, which are really linked to the use of resources and thereby also environmental performance directly. So it's about whole life carbon, so energy and carbon emissions. It is about resource efficient and circular material flows and the efficient use of water. Those are 3 areas in which we have sets of indicators. But we also have 3 other areas which are more linked to the quality and value of the building, really. So health and comfort, adaptation and resilience to climate change, and life cycle cost and value. We have indicators in those 3 areas, or as we say, macro objectives as well. So if I could have a next slide, please, we will get an overview of what the indicators actually look like. So I mentioned 6 macro objectives. So if you look in that column, you will see the exact same 6 ones that I just mentioned. So greenhouse gas emissions, material use, water reuse, healthy and comfortable spaces, adaptation, resilience to climate change, and life cycle cost and value. And in all those 6, we have, as I said, a set of indicators. You will see that it depends a little bit on the macro objective, how many indicators there are, but you will find them and they look like this. So this is really Levels. This is the overview. These are the indicators. And of course, there is a lot of information under each and one of them, and that is what we will be looking at now. So if I could have the next slide, please. Very important to know also when it comes to Levels is that we have developed this common language in such a way that you can use the different indicators at 3 different levels. What does that mean? It means that at the level 1, you will be working with the indicator at a concept stage, and then you work with the indicator in a qualitative way, typically with checklists that we provide, that Levels provides. This is a great way of focusing the conversation between the client and the design team in the beginning of a project to sort of conclude on what are the sustainability objectives for this particular project. The level 2, then you start working with the indicators in a quantitative way. So then you will start the actual assessment. And at the 3rd level, which is at the moment of handover, you will look at the performance of the building and compare it with what you had planned at earlier levels. And in some cases, for some indicators, it is also so that we provide suggestions of how to monitor these indicators, typically during the first year of the project. I want to stress that when Levels was developed, we did not do it in such a way that you had to work with all the indicators at once. You really start choosing the indicators that you are most interested in. And based on that, you can eventually, in future projects, start working with more and more of the indicators and at different levels. So you choose the indicator that you want to work with, and you choose the levels which you want to use it at. So it is indeed a very flexible way of working. Next slide, please. Having given you a very brief overview of what Levels is, I also want to introduce you to the Levels website, where there is really a lot of nice information, I believe. First of all, we have like a step-by-step introduction to anyone who just wants to get an understanding of the flavor of levels. We have links, of course, to the e-learning and the calculator and user manuals, which you will be presented with by other speakers today. But the links to all of those can be found on the Levels website. Next slide, please. So yeah, if you go to the Levels website, you will find something like this, partly, about getting to know levels. So we have the introduction, and we have the online tools, which is indeed the e-learning and the calculator. And you will find another link to this user manual of levels where you have, those are longer documents which in detail explain the methodology. This is really the backbone of levels. This is where it all started, you could say. And it's based on those user manuals that we have then been able to develop e-learning and the calculator, etc. So this is where you find everything. I'm gonna, in this short introduction, I'm gonna take you exactly to the introduction page of levels on the Levels website. So if I could have the next slide, please. And I want to explain, here you have the same slide as before, but here I will explain now that as from now on, we have chosen one indicator. I think there can be another click perhaps to frame that indeed. We have decided to work with the water indicator because we find it very illustrative. So we have chosen that for the sake of this webinar, so that what comes next in terms of introduction, the user manuals, e-learning, etc., will focus on this indicator. But of course, we have all the kind of similar material for all indicators. All right, next slide, please. So when you go to the website, you will find, among other things, you will find the possibility to learn a bit more about each and every indicator to get an understanding of what they cover. So in this case, we have chosen the water indicator, which happens to be called 3.1, but that's not important in itself, of course. But if we click on that one, we come to the next slide. And there we start at the 3 different levels. You remember I mentioned that each indicator can be used at 3 different levels. So it starts with level 1, where indeed it is a qualitative assessment that one is doing. And it explains what this level does, actually. So it is for those users who would like to, in this case, be aware of 5 highly relevant aspects for reducing and optimizing water use. It is also for those who would like to describe how these aspects have been considered or not during the discussion and decision making at the concept design stage. And it also includes a checklist to inform on water efficient design concepts. So this is what you learn, gives you a very brief understanding of what are we talking about for level 1, in this case, of this indicator. If we then go to the next slide, similar kind of information is provided for level 2. That's at the intermediate level, so it is indeed a quantitative assessment here. And this level then is for users who would like to estimate the per person water consumption and see how to work with that, and also how to minimize potable water consumption by the specification of more efficient devices and appliances, etc. So it gives a good understanding of more specifically what can be done, and you start to work in a quantitative way. The 3rd level, so on the next slide, then you start to work with monitoring and surveying of the activity as well. So this is for users who want to go and dig even further and be able to start to compare estimates with measures, etc. All right, next slide, please. Further on the website, you will indeed find more information and links about the e-learning and the calculator. So the e-learning is a great place where you quickly can go through different modules for different kinds of areas of levels or macro objectives to get to know, get a first indication of what this is. And I think you get a really good understanding of it without necessarily going through all the pages of the user manuals. Once you have the basics, of course, having looked at this, it's time to download the user manuals as well to see how you can work with this in your own working environment. Next slide, please. So the user manuals can also be found, as I said, at the Levels website. You find this under Start Using Levels, and there you get a wealth of information once you click on the User Manuals tab. And I think that's it, but let me know if there's anything else I should say with the next slide. No? So I think I hand over to Katharina then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josephina, for giving us an introduction into Levels and also showing us where we can find the different resources on the Levels website. So that's very helpful. And there will be, as Josephina also said, more details on these specific tools and menus a little later in this webinar. But first, we want to share some exciting materials with you. And the first one is a video on the tools, which actually includes, of course, more information. And that is also done in a way that's, of course, easy to digest and easy to get a first glimpse of the e-learning and the CAT. And you can share that in your network, of course, which you want. The link is going to be posted in the chat. And the same is actually also true for the publications that are available and the fact sheets. So these new fact sheets will also be available, and we're also going to be shared with you after the session in email with the correct links. But they're for your service, so they're for you to consult, to use, and to, of course, also share with people that are maybe not here today, but are also equally interested in learning more about Levels and how to use it. So please share them. They're absolutely free for that to be done. Now, moving on, we do have a poll question for you, because before we get into the details on the manuals and the e-learning tools, we would like to get a bit of a feeling of how familiar you are already with Levels. If you've been with us in previous webinars, this is something that we always do to get a bit of feel of the ground. Here's the question, and you can join that via the link in the chat, or if you get your phone out and scan the QR code on the screen. Both will get you to a Slido poll that asks you, how familiar are you with Levels? There are a lot of answer options, and you can choose multiple if you want to. It goes from I'm participating in the testing phase, over I have looked at the manuals or the website, towards receiving the newsletters, or being completely new. This is, of course, absolutely fine, and that's why we're organizing these webinars as well. So please take a moment, go to Slido, either with the link in the chat or with the QR code, and then please answer this question with as many answer options as apply to you. And then we will get a bit of feel of the land from where we're starting today. And it's always interesting to also know which kind of tools you're using, if you are. We would be looking forward to your answers. I'm giving it a few more moments. I'm also seeing that the chat is really active. That's great. Please also keep questions for Josephina still coming. We have a Q&A part later on after the next presentation. So please keep your questions coming, and also put in your answers into the Slido poll. I will give it another 10 seconds, and then I would close. Great, 3, 2, 1, and please close the poll and show us the poll results. Very good. So, oh, sorry, one back, please. Yes, thank you. How familiar are you with Levels? Many have answered, I have looked at the website. That's more than half, so that's interesting. Very good. But I'm also a member of the LinkedIn group, received a newsletter. So there's quite a lot of people that already are in contact in one way or another with the Levels environment, receiving information, but also actively looking at information at either the website or a LinkedIn page. Attended previous Levels events. That's always nice to hear as well. And we see that there is already some people that really have some basis to work on, which is great. So we're giving you more information today that you can use, but there's also a few that are maybe less familiar, and that's a great introduction then today. So we're looking forward to your continued participation, your active participation. And we're going to launch a second question to you, because as you heard, we're going today specifically looking into the indicator 3.1 on the use stage water consumption, because as Josephina also said, it's an indicator that's a little more simple from the set of levels indicators. So that's why we've chosen it as an example. And for that purpose, there is also a second question that we have, which is, do you have any experience in assessing water consumption in buildings? And this time we have one answer option, so single answer option. So no, never. Yes, but only reading my own personal water bills. Yes, limited experience with building water consumption assessments. Or yes, significant experience with building water consumption assessments. So choose the option that applies most to you or most closely to you. And then it gives us a little bit of an indication of where we stand also on the specific indicator in the context of today's webinar. Again, I'm looking for a couple more seconds in there. And then we're also going to close this poll and have a bit of a feeling where you stand in your experience in assessing water consumption in buildings. I would say 3, 2, 1, and let's see the results. Okay, so majority of people seems to have a limited experience with building water consumption assessments. There are on the bottom also a few that have significant experience. That's interesting and great to also maybe hear from you then on your experiences, also maybe looking at the indicator. There is quite a share, I think a quarter, that has not had any experience yet in assessing water consumption in building. That's quite all right. We're going to go easy, and we're going to also start with quite some explanations on the indicator itself. So thank you for answering that question. It's really helpful for us to get a feeling, because we're going to go into a next round of presentation, which is a duo presentation, both by Josephina, who you already met, Josephina Lindblom, but also from Manfred Fuchs, who are going to share a presentation on the levels user manuals and also establishing the core of the framework. So for that, Josephina will start and then Manfred will take over. Josephina, you also saw the results just now on the indicator. Let's see also how we weave that in, that there are some that have some experience, some that have significant experience, but also quite a few that are new to these kind of assessments. So let's look into this. Josephina, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and I would say, well, I'm very happy for everyone who's joining in today. We understood from the previous occasion when we had this in June that it was a useful webinar for many people, but I would really like to especially warmly welcome those who are new to levels. It's great to see that quite a few of you are that, so that's really nice to have you with us. Now I'm going to dig a bit more into the levels user manuals. I've finished my previous presentation by saying that if you click on this link, there is a wealth of information that you can find. And this is indeed the case. If you go from the levels webpage to the user manuals, you will come to what you see here. You will come to a website where all the different user manuals are listed. We call them user manuals indeed, and the first two ones are of a horizontal nature. They are not linked to any particular indicator. That's why we call them horizontal. And they give the necessary general background to anyone who's interested in working with levels. Then the user manuals, the following user manuals, which are indicator by indicator, that follows, and they're coming in the same order as they are in this matrix that I showed you before. It means that there are 16 indicators, there are 16 user manuals, indicator-specific ones. They are all gathered here in this place. The two horizontal user manuals are available in all EU languages, and those which are indicator-specific, those user manuals we have in 6 different languages. If I could have the next slide, please. Here I want to explain a bit more what the different kinds of user manuals provide. So as I said, there are 3 kinds of them. The first one, which is really the introduction to levels, is also relevant, I would say, for someone who will not necessarily be involved in the hands-on indicator assessment, but wants to have a very good understanding about what levels is all about. So here we cover why we have created this framework, who it is aimed for, and what it should be used for in general. The second user manual is also horizontal, of course, but it sets out how you can use levels in real building projects. It explains what you need to do at an early stage to be able to get going, regardless of which indicator you will then work with eventually. And it describes, or it provides tips on how you describe your particular building project so that you have all the basic information, and that will help you then to also be ready to start working with indicators per se. The third kind of user manual, which is actually 16 all in all, right? Because they cover each and one of them, every indicator or each indicator. These are standalone documents and can be read independently from each other, but we do, of course, always suggest that you read the first 2 ones before you get going. You simply pick up the indicator-specific user manual that you're interested in, depending on your wishes for your building project. And this is here that you will find the real what I need to do, step-by-step instructions and guidance. And this is really where the hands-on stuff exists. The methodologies are set out in detail. So that's these are the different kinds of user manuals that we provide. If we then look at the next slide, I want to dig deeper into these indicator-specific user manuals and how they are structured. So here we are now looking at these 16 user manuals, which go through one indicator, each and one of them. So they are all structured in the same way, all these user manuals, to make it easier to find your way once you've started to look in one of them. They start by explaining the overall structure of the document and how all of these different user manuals are linked, so that you get a feeling for what is it that you will find where. It sets out the terms and definitions for the specific indicator that you have chosen to look at. And then comes an introductory briefing where we explain why one should use this indicator, what exactly does it measure, at what stages would you use it, what is the unit of measurement, and what about scope and boundaries. Also, there are references to different standards that might be used for this particular indicator. So having set out those more general aspects of the indicator in question, there are also then instructions for each level. You remember I talked about level 1, level 2, and level 3. So it starts with the first level, of course, where you look at the indicator in a qualitative way. This section then goes through what you need to know for the first level. It explains, for example, what the aim of this particular level is. There are step-by-step instructions of what you need to do, who should be involved and when. But it also takes you to this checklist, which is typically what we are applying at level 1. So a checklist of relevant design concepts for the specific indicator. There are also some very good examples of what it could look like when you're using the checklist in real building projects. Then level 2 and level 3, instructions follow. Some parts are very similar to the level 1 section, but there is, of course, more information regarding how you start working in a quantitative way with the different indicators. At this level, it is about quantification, so there are more details required, and here the instructions go through that very carefully. Also, how you work to ensure comparability of the results. The reporting format is defined here as well, so that is It's well explained. And again, there are examples of what a filled-in reporting can look like. Okay, thanks a lot.
This gives the floor to Manfred. Manfred, we're looking forward to your part on the specific use stage water consumption indicator.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning to everybody. Now we are going a little bit more into detail of the user manuals as such. So the general idea, which we can see then on the next slide, is to give the framework of the whole thing. So water consumption as such, why it should be reduced. So we are talking about, in the end, a relatively expensive procedure. It's not only extracting the water, it's preparing the water, filtering it, treating it, maybe even with chemicals at the first stage, and then the supply lines as such. For most of the users, it's only visible then in the end when you get the water bill, but actually the costs are higher. And what we can see or what we have seen already over the last few years is that water scarcity is not a singular problem for very isolated regions of Europe. It's becoming more and more an issue here. So the general idea is clear, but what does it mean actually then in the way of what could be done, what should be done, depending on the environment, and providing examples, providing the baseline for the calculation of water consumption and where the possibilities for reducing this consumption can be found. On the next slide, you see the basic principle of what is there. So we have on one hand certain appliances that are using water. Not surprising. The main point is, since you have these different elements, you have to find the right unit. So on one hand, you have to identify how many of these elements are in the building, how many of them are used, how often, and what is the water consumption in general. So the manual already tries to limit and reduce the possibility of reporting it. The main idea is that, first of all, you can compare it, and not only with your projects, in the future also not only in your country or your region. The idea is also that it facilitates the information flow across borders, so that everybody can learn from experience and from positive projects at a later stage. So step number one, the selection of the water using facilities. Step number two, the identifying the water consumption as such. And then, just to make it even a little bit more complicated, there is also consumption that is outside these main elements, and this is coming from things like irrigation of the garden or the surrounding countryside, cleaning of the building, the windows, etc., which then should also be then calculated. Normally, it's not an individual part, it's an overall figure. Before anybody starts to panic here that it is difficult to get all this information, I will come to this. We have tried already to reduce the complexity and help you with some baseline information. Coming to the next slide. This shows that on one hand, we have the points that water is coming to these different facilities and then leaves the building again. The general idea is to reduce this blue line on top and make it shorter, which we can see on the next slide, where we see on one hand, we can look into these different utilities, toilets, washing machine, taps, shower heads, etc. We can see, not shower heads, showers, sorry. We can see products, we can see efficiency, least efficiency. All this information is based on what we have got from the different industry sectors, from the different users and professionals in the sector. So it's not a complete and perfect list, but it gives you a little bit the idea of the ranges of what is possible. And then you can see at the last of of these tables, of the columns of the table, that actually you have quite a lot of water saving potential here. And a factor 2 is already quite impressive, factor 3 even more. So there are possibilities already by selecting the right products to reduce the water consumption. To the next slides, we are even including something more here, and this is then the factor using rainwater for certain facilities, like for cleaning or for the sanitary applications, where this is also reducing the water input from the outside. Coming to the next slide, we are coming even to a step that is more complex and not always that easy to identify, and in particular to calculate. This is how much of the water used can I reuse then again in certain elements. And it also means normally more installation work, because then you have more facilities that you have to install before the whole system works. Nevertheless, all of these elements are there. All of these elements are practice. I wouldn't say common practice, but already sufficiently stable. And that was one of the ideas of levels. We are not going for an assumption what the future could bring, but really what is already there in the market, in the sector. And all these elements are covered in the different tools, in the manuals, in the e-learning, in the technical tools. And with this, I come to the last slide, which is the concept of what you have seen here right now is in reality quite a lot of different information that you have to get, to collect, and to find. Now, as I said before, there are already some information in the user manuals, also in the Excel calculator and in CAT. I will come to this in a second, where you get aggregated data for different regions, for different parts of Europe. Also, this data could be more precise, could be more specified, but this was the best we can do at that stage, which provides already or reduces your search costs for finding out what is actually in your region relevant for the different use and supply rates that you have to use for water consumption. Therefore, it's a starting point. You might find something better. The important thing is, nevertheless, that you stick to the standard philosophy that the user manuals are giving you. So you stick to the way of identifying consumption needs, that you identify and use the same formula, the same technical units to allow comparison in the end. Then coming to the Excel sheets, which is a part of the user manuals, that was the idea, to provide already a technical tool to facilitate the calculation, so that in particular micro enterprises, occupants don't have to invent the wheel again, but have already something where a lot of these calculation steps have already been introduced into the system, and therefore it's easier to calculate it. The second thing, hopefully more user-friendly than the Excel sheet, is CAT, and I will come to this at the later stage of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manfred, for that second part of the presentation, and also for giving us already a glimpse of what's still to come in the later section of today's webinar. We now have a few minutes to capture some questions that came in while both you, Manfred, and Josefina were presenting. So I'm also going to ask Josefina back with her video. And maybe Josefina, first questions coming to you also from the first presentation, maybe. And I'm trying to group them a little bit. There were some questions and exchanges in the chat already about the fact or about the question whether levels is or is it possible to get a levels certificate after you've done and went through all the different stages, all the different levels, and also how that is maybe different to other classification systems. And they were the example of LEED and BREEAM. There were already some exchanges in the chat, but of course we would like to hear from you. And maybe to add just a little third question on the languages that these kind of materials are available in. So are the tools and documentations in English only, or are there others?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've been following the chat. Lots of good questions. First of all, languages. So when it comes to the user manuals, we have those horizontal documents that I mentioned before, the horizontal user manuals. They are available in all EU languages. When it comes to the indicator-specific ones, we have provided them in 6 different languages so far. I let the colleagues, having worked on the calculator and the e-learning, to mention what languages they are providing as well. When it comes to the similarity or difference between levels and different certification schemes, that's really good that question came up, because it's something that typically is something that people want to have a very good understanding of course. Levels is not a certification scheme, so we are not sort of competing with existing ones. We do believe that there is important that some of these assessments are done in a horizontal way. Actually, when we started to develop levels, we engaged with some of the bigger certification schemes active in the EU. They were very interested in such a common language, so that they then later on, or now, because now we have levels, can align themselves with the levels indicators. The certification schemes typically include many more indicators than what we are doing in levels, but on these ones, they can find ways of aligning themselves with it then. So levels is not a certification scheme. It, however, impacts existing certification schemes, as I mentioned. And it also impacts, of course, policy making, because we see more and more, including at the EU level, how when we are developing policy, building policy, they are using, or we are using levels as a basis to bring in this kind of life cycle thinking and circularity aspects into policy. So we're basing ourselves on levels then. So it does have an impact there as well. And then, of course, we believe that it is very important for companies, regardless if they are working on certification with their projects or not, that they have a first idea about what is it at the EU level, which we think are the most important aspects of the building performance. And as we are developing policy, professionals can expect that we will be using levels as a basis there. But there is no such thing as levels gold or levels plus or something. We don't set benchmarks in levels. We leave that to either organizations or member states themselves to say, okay, we're going to use this indicator, and our benchmark, what we would like projects to achieve, is this and that. That can depend on where you are, of course, in Europe and other kinds of aspects as well. But at least what we want to achieve is that everyone's doing it in the same way.
No, thank you, Josefina, for explaining, and also the differentiation to existing certification schemes and how levels fit in. Manfred, there's also been a couple of questions, but maybe just to pick one at the moment, which is about building information models and whether these tools are used by levels.
Well, the general idea was more and more to bring all these different initiatives and reporting tools that are developed at the Commission level more or less in line. Which means the general idea is that you don't have to collect data for one system, then you have to do the same thing with a slightly different format for the next system, etc. So right now, the building information modeling is the main tool. So also the building logbook as the next step are the two tools that are the main focus for us, because that's the main reporting. We are talking about the whole building, not just elements like sustainability. And during the whole development of levels, and also today, we are closely working together with the colleagues, which is quite easy because I'm working also in the units that is dealing with the building logbook and BIM. So the general approach is that all of these things should fit together. They don't fit completely together right now, because in particular, the building logbook and BIM still have a lot of work to do to improve to finalize practically the system. I have to say finalization of some thing like that is impossible because the building requirements are changing. But let's say there is still work to do. But for the time being, I can clearly say that we have avoided any contradictions between the different systems as such. So if you use the levels information, you should be able to put this into BIM. You should be able to put this in the building logbook.
Okay, the building logbook. Thank you very much. There is maybe more a question to Josephina, but of course, Manfred, if you want to add, is who could we address if we have specific questions about the correct application of some of the indicators?
Yeah, so on the Levels website, there is also, I didn't mention that before, but there is also the possibility to send in questions there. It's kind of a help desk. So you would send in your question there, and depending on the nature of the question, different colleagues would pick it up and get back to you.
Very good. And then maybe a final one for this round is the question of whether levels is mandatory for the national recovery and resilience plans in Europe related to the European Green Deal.
So I take that one as well then. No, it is not mandatory as such, but we are, of course, strongly encouraging building projects which will be constructed or renovated with this kind of money to take a broader life cycle approach, and when doing so, applying levels.
Very good, and thank you to the two of you. There is another very interesting question, Josephina, also in the chat about making levels competitive. Maybe you can take that one in writing because we're going to move on. And Manfred, we're going to see you back in just a little while because we have another presentation first by Almudena Rodero, who is going to lead us into part 2 of today's webinar, which focuses more on understanding the specific materials and tools that are available. So to give you an overview of what's out there and how it can be applied in levels. And we start with the e-learning material that Almudena and her team have been developing. And therefore, she's also best placed to tell us more about it and also give us a show of how it works. So Almudena, please go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much for letting me participate in this interesting webinar. During this session, I'm going to present a journey through the tool that will help you to understand an overview of the structure and how it works. Levels eLearning provides a simple entry point to embed sustainability at the heart of residential and as well office buildings through a series of easy-to-navigate modules. And to ensure, you can click in the next slide, sorry that I forget to tell you. To ensure a successful learning experience, the Level eLearning program has been tested, incorporating feedback from a range of geographically diverse range of professionals across the continent before going live. The next slide, please. Well, during this session, I'm going to show you in live a journey through the e-learning, as Josefina has already inspired us, showing the different bases of levels through the web page. This is the first step for the learning path that we are recommended. If you are not familiar with levels, first go to this levels website and see all the content that is there, the introduction and all the basics. And then discover through the e-learning and start with the introduction module that will give you an overview of which is different information that has been synthesized using the user manuals that are horizontal that Josefina mentioned, the user manual 1 and 2. And then start with the different modules to learn, explore, and also self-check assessment. That includes also some case study that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. We have considering during this webinar an example of the indicator 3.1, the use stage water consumption. So I'm going to do this journey live, and the first step is to share my screen. Let me share my screen so that you can confirm that you are showing now my screen. I understand, right? Perfect. everything is working, no? Well, there are different ways to start with the e-learning. There are different points where you can access to the learning program. The first one is the Levels webpage, where you can see here in this link, the e-learning and tools. If you click on that, you are going to see this page where you can see the e-learning link, direct link, and also the CAT tool that Manfred is going to tell about later. When you click into the access tool, you will go directly to the e-learning page, but also it is necessarily that you have a login for the EU Commission, to the European Commission, which is very easy to have through this page. When you click on this, you have the different steps to create this login. And then once you have it, you can go to directly to the link from the web page, or if you prefer, you can also go directly to the EU Academy, which is the portal for the training and education in the European Commission. It has different types of courses, and you can search by topic. There are two ways. This search by topic, and the levels would be in the energy, climate change, and the environment, and also in education and capacity building. But also you can click here and look for levels or energy or buildings, some different tags that will let you go to the e-learning itself. So once you are in the course, you can see in this first page the different course details, the target audience, the objectives, and also some details of the contents of the learning with the different modules that are here. This is connected to the different macro objectives that in the beginning of the level basics Josephine explained about. And also it has two initial modules that I'm going to explain you in some seconds. Once you are logged in, you will see, because I am already logged in, it says resume, but it will identify the word enroll. You click on enroll, and then you go to the course, where you can see this page where there are the different parts of the learning journey, the introduction, and the different modules. So in the learning journey, you can see here the instructions to go to the document, which is in this place in the right hand side. This is the recommended. Let me show you. I don't know what I have. Sorry. I'm going to open it again. The learning journey, which is this page, this PDF, where you can, this is the recommended journey per priority. If you have the circularity priority, sustainable finance, resilience, global warming, and occupant quality, you can click on the different priorities. So there is some identify indicators within each of the macro objectives that you could follow that are related to this priority. But also you can go to the different indicators, as this tool is very flexible. So in the introduction module, as I mentioned, this is a synthesized information of the user manual 1 and 2. So it is very recommended that when you start to know more about levels, you start with this first module. Also because you are going to see like an overview of the tool, and maybe you are focusing one priority, and then when you see the overall picture of the framework, you identify that you want to learn more. So to learn more about different other topics. I'm going to show you the example of the module 3, which is the efficient use of water resources, which is the example that we are using in this webinar. So you need to click on this, and it would appear this first page. You click on enter, and then it will appear this first screen. All the modules are structured the same. it has this initial page with the different indicators associated in this module. As this macro objective only has this one indicator, it only appears this one. So you can click on this, and then you can see also you can go directly to the topic that you are interested in, but with this navigation content, it's very easy to navigate. But also you can just click in the arrow to go through the different screens. Always you can go to the home page that will come and goes you back to the main page of the macro objectives, where you can select other indicator. In this case, there is only one. Well, this introduction is the aim of the indicator of the water consumption. And then the next screens is about what do you need to start with this indicator. This is the information that you can use to go through the e-learning. This is connected to the user manuals that Josefina has presented, developed by the Joint Research Center. You have direct links to this content manual, and also to the calculator and other different tools for reporting. And also we have included some interesting information that you may have related to your project that you can have at the same time that you are integrating the concepts of this indicator inside of your project. Like, for example, the plant species or the manufacturer information for the sanitary fittings, some information that is very useful in order to assess and evaluate and integrate the concepts of water. The next screen is about what do you measure, what is the measure of the indicator, in this case the cubic meter per occupant per year. And then there is another screen that has information of who is responsible for the different levels. This depends on the stage of the project where you are integrating this information, these sustainability aspects, but also in regards to the level of detail that you want to go through the different water concepts. So this explains the main stakeholders and project team that are participating in the different levels. So you can see as a recommendation who could be participating in the different levels for this specific indicator. And then the next screens are related to the process, the different steps that you need to follow in order to integrate this indicator within your project. This is the level 1, for example, where you can see the different water concepts that could be taken into account. And always at the end of this level 1, we have included an example of reporting format. This could be also done through the CAT tool that Manfred is going to explain later. But this is an example of the type of recommended test that you can incorporate when reporting about this indicator. This is the water design concepts, and then an example of answers for the project. Then there are different screens for the level 2 and also for how to use the water calculator with links. And at the end, the level 3. Then we have always the reference standards. This is internationally and European standards that are recommended through the manual of this indicator that could provide more information and more detailed calculations in regards to the topic. Then a glossary where you can find some terms of reference for different definitions that are useful for this indicator. And then a quiz that is to self-check your knowledge if you have understand what is about in this indicator. And always in all the indicators we have incorporated this case study, which is a PDF where we have used always for all through the e-learning, all the different indicators, the same building, a fiction building, which is based in Madrid, an office building with different aspects included. So we have go through the different indicators and how to apply in practical and in the real implementation, the different concepts of the level 1, the level 2, also with some calculations done, and also with the level 3. So after that, I forget to mention that right now we have, as also in the user manuals, there are different translation available. You can also have this level e-learning in different languages. You need to click when you are in the EU Academy in the first page, or maybe directly if you go through the link from the website of levels, you can click on here. You can see that I have identified English as the language, but you can choose other 5 languages that we have translated the e-learning: Spanish, French, German, Polish, and Italian. So once you click in this Spanish, the Spanish version of the e-learning would appear, so you can see all the modules and everything already translated. I have also mentioned that you can, this is a very flexible e-learning. You can go get into the e-learning and go outside, whatever you prefer. This is very flexible, and you can always see here as which is the completion of the different modules that you have done, so you can come back other day and see the module again. Approximately the duration of the course is more or less 6 hours or more. It depends also if you would like to get deeper knowledge and see at the same time review the manuals. And also in the case studies, we have incorporated at some last sections related to other types of buildings, like residential and renovation, in the case your building is one of these typologies, and also some related indicator tips that, in our experience with more than 15 years working in sustainability certifications and other frameworks, that we have identified that are very useful in this case for the water indicator, and also other related indicators, because maybe in the beginning you are focused in learning in some particular indicators, but then you can see that this is related to other pieces of another macro objective, so you can see this other information. So this is my presentation.
Thank you, Almudena. And thank you also for not just presenting, but really walking us through and really giving us first-hand information and first view on how the different steps are. And actually also appreciated it was not in English this time, that we also have the availability of other languages, and people can see that that also works in other languages than English. So thank you for the moment, Almudena. We're going to go into Manfred's presentation now, and then we're going to see you back for questions and answers after that. So Manfred, you've already had the opportunity to present, but what I didn't do is I didn't properly announce that you are, of course, working for DG GROW at the European Commission, and you're a policy senior assistant. So on that note, Manfred, the second presentation of you today on the calculation and assessment tool, please take it away.
Thank you. And hello again to everybody. Let's start with the next slides. I've already mentioned there's an Excel calculator. So that was created more or less in parallel to the user manuals. The point was, why then an additional tool? The general idea was that the Excel table, nevertheless, there might be more user-friendly structures, more user-friendly formats. However, CAT is, for the ones who have been using the Excel table, it shouldn't be so different. It should just be a little bit easier to have an overview, because all the ideas that were in the user manuals, that were in the Excel table, have been taken over here in the database. However, during the development of the database, we have found out that certain elements could be better described. There could be misunderstandings, and we have improve them during this work as such. The general idea here is to have an instrument that is really for micro enterprises, so people who have not the time really to go into very deep data collection exercises and doing the calculations practically by hand, but providing here a relatively simple and user-friendly tool. One of the things is you will, when you enter levels, you have to introduce yourself by putting not your name, but you have to put in your profession. So there are the architects, the contractors, and building managers as the main groups. The country where the projects will take place, which is a little bit tricky if you are working in different countries. So start with the first one that you think you will use CAD for. And if it's an office building or as a residential building. The point here is not that we are tracing your back. The point is that we can identify, okay, are we missing certain countries? Are we missing certain professions? And why are we missing them? So the reason could be completely outside levels, could be completely outside CAT. But if there is a point where we have to say, okay, the acceptance or the use is limited because something could be improved in these instruments, then we would like to identify this and to improve our own instruments, of course. So coming to the next slide, what is it that we are actually producing here, or what is the point of levels? So as I said, it's based on what has been done already. One of the advantages here is that you can also compare in the end, and I will show this in a few seconds, on different projects, maximum 3 different projects or 3 different versions of the projects that you are introducing here. And as with levels in general, you can increase the complexity and you can use exactly for each indicator a different level. This is possible. It's not really recommendable, because then you get you really have to follow very different philosophies. It would be much better to stick more or less to one part. And my presentation will also be level 1, level 2, level 3 for the water consumption, as was the main indicator for today. The last thing is you can keep your data there. The point is, after 2 years, to avoid that the database gets too big, we are kicking it out. You can keep your data longer, but then you have to do something there. You have to click into it, you have to move into it and make a minor correction or a minor change here. Then the clock runs again. But otherwise, after 2 years, we consider that this information is no longer needed and we remove it from the database. Next slide, please. The point for today is that quite a number of people have been looking into it. As we can see, it's more in the project design, which is not surprising. And compared to the last time when I presented it, the number of countries have changed. First of all, we have more countries now, users from different countries that are using the instruments. It's also a little bit the point, how big are countries? So in reality, in this list here, which is actually from the highest number moving then downwards, Spain is still the most active ones, actually really followed by Belgium and the Netherlands. Depending on the size, of course, of the countries, there is a strong interest, and then the other countries. Moving on to the next slide, let's go directly to the concept. I've already mentioned this in my previous presentation. So we have on one hand the different indicators for water consumption. We have the calculation. And on the next slides, you can see that this concept is also reflected in CAD. So you select your project, You go to the life cycle stage that you want to cover. You choose your indicator and the level per indicator. Next slide, please. Now you start. This is practically the starting point of the whole thing. So you have either already a project selected or you don't. If you start with a new ones, I will come to this in a second. For the ones who are starting it for the first time, and for the ones who were not so much reading the e-learning or the user manuals as such, there is also a support. Please click. And the user manuals for CAT now are available for the time being in 6 different languages. I can promise that by the end of the year we have 10 additional languages. My hope that we can get all of them by the end of the year might be a little bit too optimistic, but we are updating here and we are upgrading as much as possible. Now, if you have you are fine, you feel fit enough to go into the project, then you come to my project and to the next slide. Here you will see that the general elements that you have to include here. I'm not going into every detail because this is what you have to do anyway in all the different elements. So here is not so much data collection needed because this is part of your design or the data that you already have available. Next slide, please. And here you come to the building elements and the parts that should be assessed. Here we go specifically for sanitary appliances. As you can see, it's you can select multiple different elements. You can select everything on this page if you think it's necessary. We are focusing right now on the sanitary systems. And coming to the next slide, please. As I said, you can select what level you want to use. You can also have this project, then you select another level and you try it again with a different level. All of these things are possible with CAT, but we are starting, of course, with level 1 and then going step by step through the different levels. So on the next slide, you will see what you have to put into CAT for level 1. As Josefina already mentioned, as it was mentioned several times, we are talking here about qualitative information. So the general idea is here that you tick a box and you are aware that you have to do something and you provide a useful description of what has been done. So you don't have to calculate at that time, but it should be obvious what you have done and what added value this should provide for the end user. On level 2, on the next slide, we will see that the whole thing gets already a little bit more complex. Here we have, you see here the river basin as an indication. Here you can already get additional information. You see here that we have identified specific districts. We have some data that is already available here. So you don't have to dig very deep into this information. There is aggregated data for these first 2 elements. When it comes to the building use factor, so the water consumption as such, the number of days that the building is used, that's a little bit more for you to decide. Then you get the different elements of the sanitary appliances that we have covered here based on what you have seen before on the table, because this is based on the user manual. Next slide, please. And then you practically get here at the end for the last 2 parts, it's one screen where you see practically everything. You just don't see it in one go on the screen itself. Then you have the irrigation part and the number of occupants here. And then you can run the assessment. The assessment itself, next slide, please. Gives you the baseline scenario. So here you have again on the top of the page, you have the different appliances that are used. then you get the calculations as such. And next slide, the point here is that from the baseline scenario, you can add 2 other scenarios where you are working with, for example, different products with a different user and occupants behavior. And then you can see what is possible and what is not possible in improving the performance as such. So from the first part, very horizontal, very qualitative, here very quantitative. Practically, the system is calculating after you have put in the data that you have available for these different elements. As you can also see, there are certain subtotals which are based on the different groups here. So the first one is more or less the usual part that applies for most buildings, the dishwasher and washing machine already as a separate group. Irrigation might or might not happen, and is another elements that you could use or you don't, but you don't have to use it to do the final calculation. As Josefina mentioned, on level 3, we are going to the part where we are comparing this performance, so the calculated performance, with the real performance that you can get out. And on the next slide, you see the difference. That's level 3 in CAD, where we still have the number of occupants. They, in this case, are the same. Then we have the water readings. And what you don't see here, because I didn't do the calculation here, you have the level 2 where you get in the estimates, and then you have the comparison with the level 3 measures. So the system is calculating from the meter reading, then the rates per cubic meter, the water consumption per cubic meter, by liters. And then you would see in the third table practically the comparison, how good or how bad the performance, the actual performance is. So 3 different levels, a calculation tool where some of the elements in the calculation are already included. Still, there is some data collection work from your side needed, in particular, the more complex you want to go with these elements. On the next slides, we are going to the points, what will come in the future, what are we planning here? Well, for the time being, we are in the phase where we are seeing what is possible, where are problems with the IT tool or with the concept, the structure, the reporting format that we have developed. As I said, we are including step by step more of the languages. And a very important invitation to all of you, if you have positive or negative experiences with this tool, please let us know. So also the positive ones are interesting, because then we know, okay, this is something we have to keep, and we should then foster in a certain way. The negative ones, of course, always that we can improve the tool. The tool is for you as the end users, not for us just to have something on the website. So the more we can improve the tool, the better for you. And this is our goal in this whole part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manfred. And I'm going to ask also Almudena to come back to us with her video, because we're now going to move into the question and answer session on part 2 of today's webinar. And while, of course, also people are still putting in their questions, maybe I'll kick off with a question for Almudena, which is, what's the recommended path in the e-learning? I mean, is there one, or is it basically very free to choose, or is there a recommended path in the e-learning journey?
Yes, very good question. I think that, well, the objective of levels is to be a framework that is very flexible. So it shows different indicators related to different parts of sustainability in buildings. So you can pick and choose whatever you prefer, and depending also in the level of detail and stage where you are in the project. But we have incorporated in the e-learning a recommended learning journey related to the priority that you may have in your in your project. So you can see which are the different indicators that are related to this priority. But at the same time, we also recommend that if you are maybe a high level, you want to see a high level of the tool and the framework, that you first be familiar with the tool inside of the levels web page, and then start with the module of the introduction, which is the module 0. So where you can see an overview, because maybe in the beginning you have a priority, and then you once you have this overview of the framework, you identify that you are interested in some other topics. But we have incorporated this recommended journey in the learning.
Interesting. Okay, very good.
Yeah.
And also because we heard about it in the previous part of the webinar on the manuals, I'm wondering, do you have to read the manuals before doing the e-learning, or the other way around? How is there a link between those?
When we started with this program with the e-learning, we try the initial objective was to synthesize the documentation that was already there in the manuals. So you can have the first start would be to see this level web page, and then to see the e-learning, where you can have a more user-friendly information and some synthesized steps. And then if you want to have a deeper knowledge of the tool, you can always have the manuals and read everything in more detail, even the reference standards that are linked to all the indicators.
No, thank you. Very good. So not mandatory. That's I think a good sign. Of course, recommended, right? I mean, if you want information, it's good to get them from all the sources. Maybe turning to you, Manfred. There are a few questions. Let's see how many we can really treat. But maybe to start with the first one is whether there is a standard classification system to describe the various systems and elements.
Well, most of what we have done here is based on European standards. So the moment you have a certain building elements or certain calculation methods, we are always referring to the EU level as such. When it comes exactly to the data for, let's say, rainwater in a certain region, etc., then we were going for aggregated data that we have got from these parts. And since it was mentioned in one of the questions, yes, we have covered the whole of the European Union. Otherwise, it would be a little bit unfair.
Yeah, no, that would have been maybe a next one, whether all the regions, including Ireland, are part of the tool. But you've just answered that, so thank you very much. Another one which goes into the tool. I mean, the tool itself is whether or how can you input information and work with the new scenarios to be able to compare them. So to really draw conclusions in order to see if there are differences when you create different scenarios, how would you do that in terms of input and comparison?
In this case, I have to, in this case, refer to the manual as such, because it's that would take a little bit too long right now. No? But the main point here is that you can fill in, as I said, 3 different scenarios in the CAD itself. And then you can actually put them next to each other to see the differences here. No? So you just import them. But again, for the more step-by-step at the technical level in CAD, please go to the manual for this.
No, very good. I think that's good. That's good guidance. And also, just because we were talking about practicalities, Modena, because I think people in the session are also very interested in where to start. We see this from the questions, and like where to start, what to do. What's the most practical section in the e-learning material?
Yes, we have tried to incorporate different practical elements through the whole e-learning. The first one would be one of the first steps that includes what do you need to start with this indicator. We have incorporated not only information from the user manuals, but also some information of the practical building sector, where you will have some drawings, some manufacturing information, so you can have an overview of the things things that you are going to use during the integration of the sustainability aspects. And then also in all the level 1 of all the indicators, we have incorporated an example of the reporting format, some tests that could be recommended as a guidance when you are incorporating the different concepts, in this case for water or for energy or for whatever. And then the last more practical part is the case studies, where we have followed the same building, but in integrating all the different aspects within each of the indicators. So I think that this could be very useful. But firstly, look at the origin and the concepts in order to understand better the different criteria.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so different sections definitely have a practical aspect within the e-learning tools. Of course, also very interesting, I guess, on case studies, but also on the definitions and more substantial parts. Manfred, while you were answering the previous question on where people could find more information that is more detailed than what we can provide now, you mentioned the manual for CAT. Where would that be possible to be found?
That was the first part of the presentation. So you go into the websites, the most on the right part of the different links, there you have support, and that's where the manual is found. As I said, for the time being in 6 languages, like for the user manuals right now, and improving over the time.
Okay, and does the tool actually generate automatic reports based on levels?
That depends on what you consider an automatic report. So in practically you can make, we don't have, let's say, at the output of the whole thing, one page where all of these things are listed. It depends exactly on the point that you might only select a few indicators at different levels. And for this, we have so far refrained for creating a reporting format in the end. So as I said, it's still more the testing phase. The idea would be to have something like that in the end, but right now we can also see that a lot of people are still testing it. So it's not so much that this is a complete assessment of a building or something like that, but also some people are definitely moving in. I can say this as a civil engineer, and because I did exactly the same thing with CAT, I played around with it, and based on my knowledge about the performance of buildings, I put certain things in there. But this is the point where you have to say, okay, reporting formats, it's a little bit difficult to guess what is needed here. At a later stage, when there is more expertise, when from everybody here, when we can get more feedback on the reporting, that sounds like a good idea. Personally, definitely something that I would like to put into CAT, but it's not there yet.
Okay. And you were already saying that you actually also played around with it, and it touches upon another question where somebody was asking whether you can try it out, which I understand you already said yes, but also the question of whether it is just a typical sample project. Would that still be okay to put in, or would that actually upset the central database of CAT?
You can put every stupid thing into the database that you like. You just don't have to expect that then clever information is coming out of the system. But in general, no, you can't mess around with it. It should be really, it's your project in the end. So the commission itself cannot read what you put in there. So we see that somebody is in there, how long they have been in there, and we see, as I said before, the profession, the building type, and the country as such. Now, that's the main point for us. Again, at the later stage, when it comes to the point where maybe the reporting format is more interesting, that we have a closer look into what we should look into, but we are not following it. It's never planned really to really follow what anybody has put in there. You are putting in what you like. It's your responsibility what is coming out of the system and how you present this to your vis-a-vis, no matter if they're professionals or the building owners.
Very good. So it's good to know that if somebody puts information, it's not going to upset the whole database. But of course,
No.
it does have influence on what comes out for this specific project in the end. And Manfred, I think it's also a question that comes back regularly when we talk in these webinars. But how regularly will this be updated in terms of the CAT itself?
Well, let's say if we find that there is an IT problem as such, no? So certain links are not working, or you can't click on different boxes, this we try to solve as fast as possible. So that's more or less an immediate reaction. On the other hand, CAT itself depends also on the developments of levels as such. So the question of what is changing here, and then we will adapt to this. No? So we are not changing CATs completely isolated from everything else. The changes that we are making in this year and in the next year is definitely only the functionality of the database itself, and where we find out that the way we are describing it or the way we are providing information is confusing, misleading, then we will change this. But this is just the operational part of the database itself.
Okay, and you were also mentioning that you have an interest in reaching SMEs through CAT or with the help of CAT, and also micro enterprises. But how do you actually plan to do that?
That's a good question. And actually, let's say the general idea and this general promotion of levels was always aiming in particular of let's say, the whole idea of levels is a grassroots movement. So we are not going to the top 1 to 5% performers in Europe. The general idea is if a lot of the professionals in Europe do a little bit, and this is also level 1 in this whole thing, then it has a higher impact than if I have a few office buildings who have a perfect rating in this whole idea. So the general idea of levels was always to say, okay, this is a way to make people less worried that if they start doing something, that they could do it wrong. That's a very simple approach, going to increasing complexity, which you are not forced to do. But it helps you to go further. And the general idea is from the existing schemes that are relatively complex, for obvious reasons, and there's a lot of expertise that we have taken over in levels for this, and levels itself, that both sides are coming closer together, so that the one side is reducing the complexity. We are also providing in future more information, but the main point is it's an easy tool and you can do it without making a lot of mistakes, including not crashing our own database.
Very good. I would have one final question for you, Manfred, that maybe also Josefina will then pick up in her closing. But and you've touched upon that earlier when we were discussing about crushing databases, but and what kind of data you're collecting. But there is the idea, or somebody put the idea forward in the chat, that whether if you would manage the data produced from the life cycle assessment of the building, that could be beneficial to generate baselines within the EU. Is this something considered? I mean, you touched upon it, but maybe a bit more explicitly.
Well, let's say I've been now working on different ideas of harmonizing building performance, or the ideas of harmonizing building performance for nearly 2 decades now. And the point is, it's de facto impossible. So you can create a very general structure as such. After that, you have so many different elements to calculate into the building performance, starting from the environmental environments, temperature, risk scenarios, materials used, etc., that creating something like that becomes either so general that it doesn't help you at all, or it's so precise that a lot of the projects will fall out of the scheme as such. So this is one of the reasons why Levels is providing this tool and saying, okay, you should use it, but it's not setting these levels. Maybe in future, we know more, we know it better. For the time being, I would say that the information that we have would not really go in the direction of saying, right now, it should be exactly exactly like this. This would be the benchmark. No? This is something that I would not support, because it would be most likely more misleading than helping the people. It's much more a point that you can do at national level, at regional level, than for the time being really at EU level. And I'm even skeptical about the national level. No?
Thank you, Manfred, and also for putting maybe also the expectations maybe a bit into the right direction of what we can actually do and what we can achieve with these kind of tools and the data we can generate. So thanks to both of you, also to Modena. It was very great and nice and great to see you again for this webinar, and for both of you providing us more detailed information on the e-learning and the CAT, which I hope our participants also value, because you spent a lot of time in introducing those things and also guiding us through the process. So thank you for now. Thank you for your participation today and for your great presentations and answering all of the questions. We're now moving into the wrap-up of today's session, for which I would like to ask Josefina back, where we're going to hear a little bit, Josefina, about what is your impressions of today's event, also maybe from the questions and discussions that we had, and maybe also reflecting on what we just heard from Manfred about expectations and the like. Josefina.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, I think I've been listening very attentively to the questions coming in. I've been reading as well. I think it's been for me a very interesting session, because lots of questions with really good and also good comments. Not all of the things that have been put in there have been questions really, but rather comments. So these are things that we can take and think about as well. I've been trying to answer some of the more general questions, which I feel I'm in a position to do at this stage. Several questions were very much linked, and comments as well for that matter, linked to the water use indicator. I'm not an expert in all the different indicators per se, so I didn't go into those topics specifically. But I think it's clear, from the audience that we have on and those who have expressed themselves here, it's clear that there is a big interest in taking these kinds of aspects that levels cover more into question when we develop our building projects and build, and also when it comes to policy. So I see this as something really positive, and I can assure you that even though it's not happening overnight, the Commission is indeed working in this direction as well. And as I've said before, levels has turned out to be a really important basis for this kind of development. When we started the levels development back in 2015, it was primarily to support building projects, to take their first steps and gradually grow with that. So to become real experts in the end through the journeys that levels can take projects on. But once we published levels, we realized that it was actually a very good tool to use as a basis for further policy development as well. And it seems to me that lots of people with us today think in the same way. So that's great. I want to thank everybody. And very importantly, I would really like to ask you to fill in the feedback survey, which will be placed or is already now placed in the chat. It helps us to make future webinars more interesting, or even more interesting for you. So that takes very little time, and that would be super if you take your time and do that. And then, of course, for those of you who have not checked out the Levels webpage or joined the LinkedIn group, please do so, because there's quite some activity in different places in the Levels community. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Josefina. Thank you also for putting today's webinar in like 2-3 sentences of a summary. So thanks for that. And also for highlighting already that there are quite some tools, as you heard today, that can help you on your journey with levels. Firstly, of course, starting with the website, where you will then also be guided towards what you saw today on the e-learning materials, the CAT and the manuals. But also, of course, there is the LinkedIn group, as Josefina has said, and there is also the opportunity to subscribe for the newsletters. So there is plenty of ways how to connect to levels, to get involved in the levels network, and exchange and get more information. I want to like to thank our speakers today, who've done yet again a marvelous job at trying to portray a wealth of information in very little time, but to guide you, if you're interested, on your way on how to use levels and use it maybe more effectively and efficiently up until now. Then I would like to also thank, of course, the European Commission, specifically Josefina, the colleagues from the Levels team who in the background have done a marvelous job in making this technically work, which I think you would agree with me is not always the case in online meetings, but today it has been running really smoothly. So thanks also to Clara, Linnea and Carolina in the background. I would like to thank all of you as participants for your great and active contributions today. It has been a great webinar, and specifically because of your questions and comments that we could address. So thank you very much. Last words are, please complete the survey that you've got the link in the chat. And please also stay active, connect on LinkedIn, and have a look at the website. So thank you for today, and I hope to see you back for the next Levels webinar.